You know, it's a pleasure to have Dinesh D'Souza. This guy is a great patriot. He's a superb scholar, filmmaker, thinker, writer. My wife and I have gotten to know him and his wife a little bit, and we really do find it to be fantastic. And he's got this great film out there. You can still see it online, thedragonsprophecyfilm.com, thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. We will post that on all our social sites about October 7th. And much of it is from a biblical perspective. And so I wanted to ask Dinesh D'Souza, who has been friends with Tucker like most of us, the danger that he, in particular, but people who are attached to him and promoted by him, are presenting to our society, to our culture, to the survivability of the conservative movement. And does this not also provide an enormous opportunity for these Marxist Islamists on the left?
Yes, the danger of Tucker is that he is driving a wedge between Jews and Christians, between America and Israel, between, in a sense, the two foundational pillars of Western civilization, which are Athens and Jerusalem. And so this is bad for Trump. It's bad for MAGA. It gives a terrible brand to the Republican Party because it seems to open the door to all kinds of bigotries that are now pouring into the Republican side, not just anti-Semitism, but hatred toward blacks, hatred toward Indians like Harmeet Dillon and Vivek Ramaswamy. It is actually giving us a terrible image. I noticed in New Jersey, for example, yesterday, there's a community that is very heavily Indian that went by about 20 points for Trump, and now it went by 20 points or more for the Democrat. So a massive shift. How do you explain that except for the fact that Indian Americans who felt more and more welcome in the Republican Party are now being made to feel like they need to go back to India?
Mm-hmm. Isn't part of the problem a guy like him and people like him, they don't have to really deal with the consequences of what they're doing, and they're not really feeling the consequences of what they're doing or care about them because they have this niche. Even if it's a few million people, it's still a tiny percentage, a fraction of the population generally. And if they're paying $99 a month or whatever it is, they still become incredibly wealthy, and they have to continue to become increasingly outrageous to draw attention to themselves. I've been thinking about this. This is what so many of the podcasters have to do. They have to separate themselves from the rest. And this particular type of podcaster, they're not about informing, educating. They're not about interesting topics, profound topics. They're about the crazier you can be, the more rogue and unhinged you can be. If you attract that niche, even a growing niche, you enrich yourself.
I do think that that is part of the story, particularly with some of the other influencers who have attached themselves to this Groyper movement and Tucker and Nick Fuentes. I think with Tucker, however, he is playing a darker and a bigger game. And that is to institutionalize himself within powerful institutions like the Heritage Foundation, like TPUSA. He's obviously got an in at the White House. He's got a son working for J.D. Vance. So I think for Tucker, it is ultimately about steering the entire MAGA movement and the Republican Party post-Trump. They can't do very much with Trump. Trump is sort of not on their side, and they've recognized that. But they're looking at a post-Trump future. And I think Tucker is using this kind of army of angry young men who are sitting in their basement. They hate their life. These are people who are on social media 8 or 9 hours a day. And he's using them as a kind of online militia to browbeat other people into submission. This is why for a long time no one dared to criticize Tucker. So in some ways, I think Tucker's plan is firing because a wall of criticism has now mounted against him. I don't think he fully expected that. But I think his goal is nothing less than to ultimately be at the steering wheel of the MAGA movement post-Trump.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people are attacking him now, and I can tell you when I effectively started this battle, You were working on your documentary at the time. I guess it was in May, because he took the first swipe when I met the president. I told Mr. Producer, and I told my wife, I think I told you the other week, I said, I'm going into the swamp. I'm going to get into the gutter with these guys, because that's where they are. I can't debate them. I'm not interested in debating them. I'm interested in exposing them. And I said, and I'll see you hopefully in 6 months. And yet, I still have one leg in the swamp. And but I have noticed that there is an enormous amount of pushback now, and I think this is crucially important, particularly from conservative institutions, people of faith. I mean, he actually attacked evangelical Christians, saying that he viewed them as, he despised them more than any other people, more than a terrorist, he despised these evangelical Christian Zionists. I think you're a Christian Zionist, aren't you?
Yeah, I've never used that label, but especially now that it's being used as an accusation, I all the more enthusiastically embrace it. I embrace it almost as an epithet that I'm going to wear as a badge of honor. But look, with Tucker, you have now an ensemble of views that goes actually even beyond platforming Nick Fuentes. I mean, here's a guy just recently who has offered the following, ideas. Number one, in World War II, we perhaps should have allied with Hitler. Hamas is not a terrorist organization as much as it is a normal political movement, maybe somewhat like the Labour Party. He's gone on to say Sharia law is not all that bad. The socialist narco-terrorist leader of Venezuela, he said, is basically somebody who is, quote, socially conservative. So you just put all of this together, and there's a lot more where this came from, and you ask, is this really MAGA? Is this where MAGA wants to be? This is not about canceling Tucker. This is about defining who we are as America First conservatives.
So Dinesh D'Souza, I know you're not a psychiatrist either, but let's give it a shot. Why is Tucker Carlson unhinged?
I cannot say that I know for sure. Of course, there are a lot of people who say this is for the money. There's a giant river of Islamic cash that is pouring into the American institutions to try to buy them off. I did notice that right about the time that I saw in a New York Times article that Qatar is launching a major campaign to try to dissuade Trump from using force to overthrow the Maduro regime in Venezuela, Tucker, like right on cue, comes out with a kind of defense of Maduro, a defense of socialist Venezuela, making the peculiar claim that they are somehow a, quote, conservative society. Now, that was very eerie to me. I've always thought it odd. Tucker's a wealthy guy. He comes from a wealthy family. It's hard for me to believe that he's solely motivated by money. I don't think he needs Qatar to pay the mortgage. So I've never been content with that kind of explanation. At one point, as you probably know, Mark, Tucker made the very strange claim that he had been physically attacked by a demon. I don't know if you've heard about this. I've actually watched the video. He's not joking. He claims that a demon attacked him in his bed and bloodied him and actually bruised him and left blood on the sheets. And Tucker seemed very bewildered by this. But this is, I would not write this off and dismiss it completely. I'll call this the demonic explanation. I was on Roseanne Barr's podcast, and she said, I even know the name of the demon that attacked Tucker. And I was like, Roseanne, what is it? And she goes, well, in the Hebrew scriptures and in the Talmud, there is a name for the demon of anti-Semitism. And she told me the name, which I now forget. So look, we're flailing here at trying to give an adequate psychological explanation. I agree with you that we should focus really on the effects and the actual content of what Tucker is saying.
Mm-hmm. Now, if politicians, let me put it to you this way, Dinesh. If you're going to run for the Republican nomination for President of the United States, this is going to come up. You're going to have to make a decision. If you stand with the bigots and the racists, the Jew haters and the Christian haters, basically American haters, you point out the founding of Judeo-Christian values and so forth, or stand with the rest of us. These politicians are going to have to make that decision. They're going to have to decide whether he and his little buddy Fuentes and that whole crowd many of them are just bizarre podcasters, whether they're going to stand with them or stand with everybody else, right? They're going to have to make a decision.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems to me that any aspiring presidential candidate, or maybe even candidate for other office, who kind of embraces this kind of groyper, white, identitarian agenda. We don't need the Jews. We don't need the blacks. We don't need the Asian Indians. I mean, not only do they have no future, but if they do have a future, they will drag the Republican Party like right off the cliff, right off the precipice. I think the encouraging news is that I don't think that's going to happen. I think right now there is a kind of almost unanimous. There was a time when I said to myself, I don't see Tucker having even a single, like, very prominent public critic. And now I would say the opposite. I don't see Tucker having a single public defender. Even the Heritage Foundation has backed off completely from their earlier and unwise kind of embrace of him. And so I think that the message has gone through to the Republican Party and MAGA that this stuff is really toxic, that no one is talking about banning these people, but they have platforms already. They're going to continue to have these platforms. And like you say, there's an incentive for them to put out this salacious material one on top of the other, because maybe it has in a perverse way a kind of entertainment value, but it's something entirely different to embrace it as a position either for MAGA or for America First or for the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. All right, my friend, I appreciate you very much. You take care of yourself. Thank you. Very well done.
Thank you very much.
All right, you take care.